Hello and welcome into this week's edition of Intercollegiate Conversations.
Vaguely to begin, I mean, I know your story, but just for the sake of the video, as succinctly as possible, tell me about your story, how you started as a player at VMI to now where you are, where you were named the head coach at Fairleigh Dickinson while still in your 30s. How did you go from point A to, let's just call it point B?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think I've ever done anything succinctly in my life, including my career path here. But no, I walked on at VMI. Was lucky enough over the course of my career to play for a guy that I was employed by for a decade in Duerbacham, and loved playing for him. Was lucky enough to get a GA spot, which was really a third assistant spot at UT Martin right out of college. Randomly enough, I'd sent out like 400 resumes and cover letters, just snail mail. I sent them out, and lo and behold, Brett Campbell at UT Martin in August, because I didn't think I was going to get a job in coaching right away. I was really trying to figure out what I was going to do that first year out of school. Calls me up at like 10:15 at night in early August and says, "Hey man, I was cleaning out my office. Your resume just happened to be on my desk, and my third assistant, which is a GA spot, he just took a JUCO job. Are you still available?" And absolutely, yeah, I'll be there tomorrow, And so he happened to know Coach B just through passing, not a deep relationship, but just called him up, and Coach B gave me a good review. And so I was out there interviewing a week later and was lucky enough to get the job, and that got my foot in the door. I was there about 8, 9 months, and then we had a good year. Had a kid named Lester Hudson who ended up playing in the NBA for a little while. Has done a really successful overseas, kid out of Memphis who was one of the better players I've ever been around in my career. Just an unbelievable player, and we had a good team, and we were able to have success that year, which UT Martin can be a challenging place, and Coach Campbell did a good job with that, and was lucky enough to get back at VMI my following year. Third assistant spot opened up there, and it was it was before Dobos and all that were really that big at the lower major level. And so I was kind of third assistant that did some recruiting, but was really a glorified Dobo for all intents and purposes. But was there for 4 years. Coach B is the most underrated coach, in my opinion, in the history of college basketball. I mean, we had three winning records in 4 years. Went to 2 conference championships games over that stretch. He just did an unbelievable job. Now, from my perspective, I got a little frustrated because I was the third assistant for those 4 years, and nobody on our staff had left. And even though Coach B had a ton of success, he hadn't really gotten sniffs at other jobs. And so, like anybody, you want to see career progression, and I felt like I was a little stagnant. And out of left field, a classmate of mine at VMI and one of my best friends, his sister was a lady by the name of Valley Jacks. She had been the assistant women's basketball coach at Northwestern, and she got the head job on the women's side at Siena. And so I had never thought about coaching women's basketball a day in my life, just not something I'd ever thought of. But my buddy called me and said, "Hey, listen, my sister just got the job. I know you're frustrated. Would you have any interest in this?" And truthfully, my first thought was no, I don't have any interest. I knew Allie a little bit and was impressed by her and knew she would do well, but it just hadn't been in my purview. And so went to dinner with him that night, and he said, "Hey, why don't you just give it a little bit more thought?" And thought through it, spoke with Allie. You have one phone call with Allie, you're really impressed by her. So I ended up going up to Albany for a couple of years. It was a great experience for me. I learned a lot about myself and, how to be a better coach through those 2 years on the women's side. And some of the girls that I coached over there were the toughest people I've ever been around. So that was an awesome experience. But then I got about 30 years old at that point and decided that I wanted to kind of get into this normal lifestyle. The coaching thing can be obviously a little overwhelming and all consuming. And I had a girlfriend I've been dating for a long time, Kara, who's now my wife. So I got out of coaching and went into financial planning with a VMI alum who'd been doing it for a while just outside of Philadelphia. So my wife is from Philly, or the suburbs of Philly. And so I moved, we actually moved to like Center City, and I reverse commuted to do my financial planning job for 2 years in Wilmington, Delaware. And actually liked it, enjoyed a lot of it, but started volunteering at Cardinal O'Hara High School in Philly, or in Drexel Hill rather, and got to be part of that Philadelphia Catholic League, which has a great basketball tradition. And we weren't great the year that I was there to help, but I loved being in the gym again, and it just made me realize, like, man, I had this right the first time. Like, I literally found myself in a middle school gym recruiting kids to come to Cardinal O'Hara, and thinking to myself, well, I'm doing this for free on a Saturday. I don't know any kid in here. I could just be doing this like for my life. And I might have messed this up. I might have made the wrong decision here. So lucky for me, Coach B had then taken the job at the Citadel, and had a spot in his staff come open. It was a Dobo job, making not much money at all. And I had to basically convince my then fiance, like, hey, I know this isn't exactly how we had planned life from this point forward, but I really feel like I got to get back into this thing. And so I ended up taking the job. She moved down a year later, got married that August, and then drove a little bit of Uber to try to make ends meet while we went down there for the first year or so. And then, a lot of the things that happened over the course of my career, I would just say were lucky. I had a guy leave the staff, and coach bumped me up to second assistant when that person left. And I was there for a couple of years, and then last 2 years, the top assistant, eventually associate head coach. And was proud of what happened to with the success we had, the kids we brought in, because the Southern Conference is obviously an incredible league, as you know, Luke. Like, I mean, there's not an easy night out there, particularly when you're in military schools. But they decided to make a change, and so we kind of went our separate ways. And I was lucky enough to jump on with a good friend and great basketball coach in Grant Leonard at Queens as they were making that transition from Division II to Division I. I was only there for about 4 or 5 weeks, and then I got a phone call from Tobin up here at FDU that he had gotten the job, and him and I had been friends for years, dating back to when he was an assistant at Siena on the men's side, and I was an assistant on the women's side, and our offices were right next to each other. And I had actually known him even further back than that, going to 5-star basketball camp, and him being like one of those counselors that was like all 5-star young coach. I knew it. Honestly, I kind of wanted to be him when I was in high school, because I always knew I wanted to coach college basketball. So we struck up a relationship there with, and that kind of, we stayed friends. And so when this job came open, he called me, and I'd always told him, like, hey, if you get a job in the Northeast, I'd love to come work for you. Because one of the deals I made with my wife when I got back into college coaching was, if I can get us back close to your family, I'll take the job. Like, if the job makes sense and the money's okay, we'll go. And so I hated leaving Grant, and Queens is a great situation down there, and Grant's a great basketball coach, but I made a promise to my wife. And so we come up here, they had 4 wins the year before we got here. We brought in some really good transfers that were with Tobin at St. Thomas Aquinas, where he'd had tremendous success for 9 or 10 years. And lo and behold, we got hot at the right time. We had a big turnaround, and then we made that massive run in the NCAA tournament, and we're able to make a name for ourselves beating Purdue. And then everybody's life changed, even more so. And so I don't recommend this career path that I took to anybody. It doesn't really make sense. But I mean, I think people are not honest with themselves. They don't think that a good portion of progressing, particularly in coaching, is about timing and luck to some degree. You got to do your job. You got to work really hard. You have to have a good reputation. You certainly have to do, your job well, and you have to represent yourself well enough to be in position for, if that luck does strike, now you can actually take advantage of this opportunity. And I'm certainly, proud of the way I go about my work day in and day out. But the reality is, it's got to be timing, and you never know how it's going to work out. I mean, you can never connect the dots forward. You can only connect them backwards. And, nobody thought that when I took a women's basketball job that it was going to somehow lead to me being a head men's basketball coach 9 years later, but it did. And so, not succinctly, but that's how we got here, Luke.
No, that's fine. A lot of great information. And with that said, with the things you just mentioned there at the end, also, how important is the networking side and knowing the right people when it comes to coaching and progressing in the ranks of college basketball coaching?
Yeah, the networking stuff definitely matters. And I'll be the first person to tell you, I was not instinctively good at it. What I started to come to terms with that was comfortable for me was more of like, okay, where are there genuine relationships here, and fostering those relationships. I read a book a long time ago by Bob Bodine, The Power of Who. And it was literally based upon, basically, Jesus Christ had 12 disciples, and yet here's this massive religion that we have out of it. And it only took 12 people. And his kind of perspective was, if you have 12 people that you have genuine relationships with, that from that, you'll get enough opportunity. And you don't have to do this whole, like, I got to throw my card out to every single person or try to be this fake guy to all these people. Like, no, just develop organic relationships, hold on tight to them, and then opportunity will present itself. Now, obviously, that's not going to work for every single person, but for me, it was able to work out, and I'm really lucky that it did.
You spoke about some of the frustration you had early on with, well, obviously, I mean, you got out of coaching there for a couple of years, and then knew you had to get back in. What would be your advice to those either trying to break into college coaching or that feel like they're stuck at a lower level, let's say, in the college ranks? What would be your advice for somebody to deal with that frustration and to have the patience to, give it time to hopefully be able to move up the ladder?
Yeah, I think when you're first getting into coaching, first of all, you got to be willing to work for nothing because that's just the nature of the beast. And even maybe more so now that this house settlements happen in schools, lower major universities are going to have less amount of money. But you're working for a recommendation. So if you can just get your foot in the door and get that recommendation, it's honestly, I think it's almost like you got a 1 or 2 year window when you're first getting in there, maybe 3, depending on what everybody's individual means are, to say like, hey, I just got to go at this thing. And it's either going to happen or it's not. And there's going to be people that it certainly probably are deserving that it doesn't happen for. But none of it's going to happen if you don't work and if you aren't willing to go beyond what's asked of you. So you have to definitely start from there, right? For the people that are in it, have been in it for a while and haven't made the progress they would like, I do think a lot of this is sticking to it. And that eventually, kind of like what the old bamboo tree thing is, like it grows underground for years and all of a sudden 1 year it just shoots up like that. I think that's reality. I will say this, me leaving to go to women's basketball obviously helped me tremendously. I don't get here right now without that. But I think when I got out of coaching altogether, I lost sight of why I enjoyed coaching. I started comparing myself to where everybody else was in their career. And all of a sudden, what I was doing wasn't good enough anymore. And since I was 12 years old, I knew I wanted to be a college basketball coach. And there wasn't a dollar amount or a title that was attached to that when I was 12 years old. Now, we're adults, responsibilities, those are all real things that you have to come to terms with. And can you navigate all that? But, for me, I lost sight of what I really loved it. And so I think you have to make sure that even through those tough times that you have people there to help remind you, even though my father tried to help me and I didn't listen to him anyways. Like, hey man, this is not why you do this. If you just stick with this, and keep doing your job well, it'll work out. And you have to have some faith in that. There's no doubt about it. Now the counter to that was, I did some outside of the box move there. Maybe that's not the move for everybody, but it worked for me. So maybe don't be afraid to do something that you never considered before just because it's an opportunity, and opportunities are all you can ask for. And they might be few and far between in college coaching because there's a ton of people who want to do these jobs and very few jobs to do them. Coach B used to always put it in perspective for us as assistants at the Citadel. He used to always say like, hey man, there's fewer Division I men's basketball assistant coaches than there are brain surgeons in this country. And obviously we're not nearly as smart, but it does provide some perspective of like, man, hey, there's a lot of people who want to do this job. I'm pretty lucky that I get to do it.
Absolutely. Obviously, when you look at college sports, since you got into coaching, so much has changed, whether it's name, image, likeness, the conference realignment, all that sort of stuff. But specifically in terms of the coaching side in college athletics, have you seen a big change in those 17 years, whatever it's been, in terms of like networking, job searching, the way people are hired? Have you noticed any sort of changes in the hiring practices or the way coaches have to go about getting these jobs since you first got in college coaching?
I don't think I have. Not on that side of it. I'm sure I think there's more opportunities at the higher levels with this, the way that the NIL and all that stuff. Like there's probably, you can see it now, there's general managers out there. Like that wasn't even something that we would consider ever existing before. So there might be some unique opportunities up there at that higher level. For us here, like we still have GAs, we're still hiring guys based off of relationships and do I know, the thing that I've looked at a lot is I might not know you, especially if we're looking at a GA situation, but do I know someone who knows you and do they speak highly of you? And that's the way that I've been comfortable hiring people. Now, other people, I know hire people based on, who's going to help us get the most players. And we've tried to go off of, okay, who do we think is really good at their job? Their job is going to work hard, is going to care about the players, and less about like, if you happen to be connected to players, that's great, but we're not hiring you because, you can help us get a player. So if you come here and you hire somebody off of that and the kid's not any good, and I'm looking at this guy going, well, dude, I hired you to bring in a good player, and that you were supposed to connect to this guy's not all you cracked him up to be. Like, I just don't think that's going to work. So we've still done this thing based off of like the same old stuff that happened when I was getting into coaching. Maybe that's wrong, but that's just how we've approached it.
You probably already touched on some of this stuff, but if you could give your younger self advice, what would you tell yourself back, when you were early on in coaching that would have maybe made things easier, would have helped you along the way that you know now?
One of the things I do, and it maybe is a little bit vulnerable here, when I was 22, 23, 24, 25, I looked at these guys who were in their, higher level spots in their career, like a head coach that was sitting next to me or a high major assistant. I was like, man, why would they want to talk to me? Almost a little nervous or passive of like, they're human beings. Just strike up a conversation with them. And I know we're out there recruiting a lot of time, we're doing our jobs, but that doesn't mean that they aren't willing to talk to you. And I think that because I was so passive when it came to networking, probably because of like a little social anxiety, if you will, that hurt me, and, just be a good dude, work hard, and, talk to guys, and the networking piece will help. But, it's not that complicated. If you're willing to just kind of stick to the basics and be good to people and just put yourself out there a little bit.
For you, with the various jobs that you have had, what are some qualities you look for in a work environment to know that this is the right opportunity for you?
I think that you have to try to find people, and this is hard to recognize, but I think maybe by asking people around that person, you can find it is like, who takes the job seriously, but not themselves seriously. Um, you know, I've been very lucky that I've worked for, Duger Balcom and Allie Jackson and Brett Campbell, and like people that realized that there was more to life than basketball, even though basketball is extremely important to us. So yes, you work hard, but the relationship piece is what matters here. And, it can't just be about winning and losing. I know it is. Like, college coaches get hired and fired almost entirely off of winning and losing, but I don't think a program functions well if that's the only thing it's about. I don't think those results will come out if that's how it's approached day in, day out. So again, find people who will work hard, want to progress your career. If you're looking at it from the how do I move up trajectory, like how have people left that program on their staffs. But more importantly, like, what do people around that person that's doing the hiring say about him? And if that guy seems like a good dude, or hey man, that guy's just going to run you into the ground and you're going to get screamed at all day long. Like that's I don't think, maybe somebody wants to go work for that person. I don't think it's that important. But yeah.
A couple last ones, and again, this might be redundant. You might have already touched on this stuff earlier in your answers, but for you in particular, what do you think are the most important traits that allowed you to get to this point where you are now the head coach of Fairleigh Dickinson?
I guess if you make me put something on this uncomfortable question, I would say that I do work really hard, and I do think I manage relationships with players well, especially as an assistant. I'm still navigating how to do that as a head coach because it is unique position from one chair to the next. And I think I was reliable. I think that the people that I worked for knew that if they asked me to do something, that it was going to get done, and it was going to get done in a professional manner. And I think that being consistent with those things is kind of what's put me in a position to be here.
And then, really, lastly, the last thing to ask you is, I know it's different for coaches, but the whole idea here for Intercollegiate is this job board. And as soon as a job is available, it'll be posted on the website. You could go there, you could see the different, the track record, how long coaches have been there previously, the athletic director, how long he's been there, yada, yada, yada. My question for you would be, as someone who has been a coach and has gone through the process of trying to get jobs, and you can speak frankly, how much of a role has something like that played or could play for coaches, like a job board? How valuable is that? Or is it more of just kind of word of mouth relationships, knowing people to get those right opportunities?
Yeah, I do think word of mouth and the relationships are really important because a lot of times that'll get you insight onto what's going on before something's posted. But the reality is the background and the detail of all the stuff you're talking about with how long the coach has been there, who else has been there, like having it clearly defined as kind of who are the people who have been around this person who's doing the hiring, and then being able to help you connect the dots to those people could be critically important.